Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie, host and head bookologist here at the Get Literate podcast. I'm a book loving, notebook hoarding reader and writer on a mission to change lives one book and one notebook at a time. On this podcast, we explore the power of bookology. What's that? That's the study of books and reading and notebooks and writing mixed with mindful practices and creativity to create lives we love. Here, you'll find episodes exploring the reading and writing life and how they can make our actual lives better. You'll get book recommendations and notebooking prompts around particular themes, and you'll even hear from authors and special guests who can fuel our reading and writing hearts and help us take inspired action in our own daily practices. So, grab a notebook and your TBR list, and let's get literate. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Get Literate podcast. I'm Stephanie Affinito, and I'm here with another episode exploring the transformative power of reading and writing. In today's episode, we are getting nerdy, bookishly nerdy, of course. Now, I love tracking my reading life, and I track my reading life in a couple of different ways. I have a bookish spreadsheet that we're going to talk about today. I have a list in my notebook of books that I've read or want to read or have been recommended. I keep very good track of my reading life on Goodreads, and I love writing reviews there online. And I even keep track of my reading on social media, where I snap a picture of a book that I've recently finished, add my review, and share it with others. It's just something that has become so ingrained to me. My reading life is important. What I read is important, and I want to share that reading life with others. So, tracking my reading life really is an essential part of making my reading life feel really good. Now, there's all sorts of research on tracking things, right? If you want to get better at something, if you want to change a particular aspect of your life, one of the first things people recommend is to just start paying attention to it. Do you want to get healthier? Well, track your steps for a week and see where you land. Do you want to get healthier in a different way around what you eat? Well, keep a reading log, or I'm sorry, an eating log, and see what it is you actually eat, right? If we pay attention to something first before we try to make all sorts of changes to it, we can see where we're at and we can decide intentionally the direction we want to go into. And that's what my reading log does for me. Number one, it keeps my reading life front and center. I track every book there, so I know how many books I'm reading and which authors I'm reading and in which formats. And doing so helps me choose the next set of books that I want to read, right? So if I realize that I have just read 3 or 4 personal development books in a row, then my reading log might prompt me to say, hey, maybe you'd enjoy a really great family saga fiction title instead. So my reading log helps me pay attention to my reading life, to grow my reading life, to choose books and set reading goals. And we know if we do all of those things, then we can actually impact our real life also. So in my bookish spreadsheet, and yes, I have a bookish spreadsheet. I created it through Google Docs, through Google Sheets, actually. And so whenever I enter in a book, the statistics automatically get pre-populated because of the magic of Google into these wonderful charts that I can examine. So in my book log, I have a page for all of my book entries. It's where I track the title, the author, my rating, the format I read it in, the genre I read it in, where I found it, etc. And then on the second page of my spreadsheet, I have all of my beautiful charts that come to life through the magic of the Google platform. So I track things that are important to me. I don't really care how many books I read in a year. I mean, I kind of do because I get sucked into that Goodreads end of the year video that they give you of how your reading life has been. But honestly, I really don't believe it's the number of books you read. I think it's the number of books that impact you, right? So in my reading log, I am tracking how many, but it is not my primary focus. I'm tracking other things that are important, like what genres am I reading? How diverse is my reading? What format am I reading in? And I feel like by tracking that, I can make an important distinction, right? Beyond how many books I'm reading, but how those books are really helping me. What I have found over the years is that my reading log scarily reflects my actual life. So every month I browse my reading log for the year and I look at that bookish spreadsheet and I see how am I doing? How varied is my reading? What genres am I reading? What format am I reading in? Who's recommending books to me? I do just a quick little once over at the end of the month to help me decide where I want to go in the coming month. But I also take a deep dive at the end of the year. And that's what I'm doing today. I look at the totality of my reading statistics for the entire year and decide, how did that feel? What do I want next year's reading life to look like and why? And when I did that this year, I kind of had a mind blown kind of moment. Because when I looked at my bookish spreadsheet and I looked at my statistics and I looked at the gaps I saw in my reading life that I wanted to set goals around, I realized that those same reading gaps were also my life gaps. And I thought, huh, if I can find and then mind my reading gaps, maybe I can make some even bigger impacts in my actual life too. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to share with you my bookish spreadsheet and the statistics that I have from 2024. I'm going to talk about my reading gaps and goals and how that connects to my life gaps and goals. I'm going to give you a couple of questions just to sit and marinate with to help you find and mind your own reading and life gaps. And then I'm going to offer you an invitation or a challenge, if that feels better, for you to track your reading life in 2025 so that you can take this same deep dive that I'm taking right now at the end of the year. So let's get to it. What does my reading log, my bookish spreadsheet, look like? Well, I'm not going to reveal how many books I've read because I've already told you I feel like that is less important. And even though it's a number that gets thrown around social media a lot as a symbol of status, I think there are so many other variables in our reading lives that can help us out more. And so, what do I track in my reading life? Well, number one, I track my book ratings. And this is kind of comical because if you know me, you know I tend to give books almost exclusive 5-star ratings because I have an entirely different rating system. I like to rate by hearts, not stars. I like to rate by how the books impacted me. And because I expect every book to have some sort of impact on me, I tend to give 5 stars. I don't want to mess with an author's algorithm online because I had a bad day or I didn't like a character, right? So that is kind of shockingly something that is on my spreadsheet, but it's something that I'm mindful of. Now, the things that I really love to track are this. How varied is my reading life? This is the category where I say, am I reading books that are for adults, for young adults, for middle grade readers, or are they picture books for kids? As a book person, as a children's literature professor, as a children's literature podcaster, I need to make sure I'm reading children's literature. But I don't want to read so much children's literature that I forget my adult life, and vice versa. So I tend to go back and forth between which genre I read more or less of, and my goal is around 50-50. I want to read about 50% adult text and 50% children's literature. And I am so excited to share that I did it. I read 52.6% adult books, fiction and nonfiction, this year, which means I read just about 50% of children's literature. I don't know if I would have done that if I didn't browse my reading statistics every month and see, ooh, This month, I read almost all children's literature, or this month, I read mainly all adult literature. So looking at them monthly helps me keep my end goal in mind, and I'm so excited that I did it. Now, let's go to one that I didn't quite hit the mark on, although I'm kind of close. The next thing I track in my reading log is this. What genres am I reading? If left to my own devices, I would probably exclusively read realistic fiction with a lot of family sagas. That is just my jam. I love it. And left to my own devices, I would not wander out of that little genre groove that I am in. So I do track the genres that I read with a goal to make them as diverse as possible. So when I look at my reading life in 2024, there are some positives in this area, but I definitely could work on this. 45.2% of the books that I have read were realistic fiction. And I can tell you that lots of them were family sagas. But that means about a little over half were divided up among other genres: historical fiction, personal development, verse, memoir, fantasy, nonfiction, short stories, picture books I put in here as a genre as well. So I'm not doing too bad. I've got 50% or a little less than 50% of the genre that I love, and then a little over 50% of everything else. So I'm happy with it, but I would like to see that realistic fiction category shrink just a little bit to make room for all of the other genres I know are waiting patiently out there. Now, the third thing I track is the format that I am reading. This is where I like to keep track of how many print books I've read that I can actually hold in my hands versus digital ebooks I've read versus books that I've listened to. And if you've listened to this episode for the last couple of years, you know I have had an eternal goal to listen to more audiobooks. And you also know that I don't do it. And in fact, this year, or I should say last year in 2024, I did not listen to a single audiobook. It is just not my thing. I feel like I should just give up and say, you know what? You don't have to set this as a goal anymore, Stephanie. It is not your preferred format. But I really do want to listen to at least the memoirs that are narrated by the authors themselves. So I'm keeping it, and I'm giving myself a demerit. You know, if we're living in Gretchen Rubin's world, I'm giving myself a demerit that I haven't listened to at least one audio book. Now, in terms of digital books versus print books, I read 73.3% of books that I could hold in my hand and turn the physical pages. And 26.7 of my books were on my Kindle. Now, when I look at this, I don't really have a goal to be 50-50 here. I love physical books. I love to hold them. I love to smell them. I love to turn their pages, put a bookmark in there. It is just my preference. So I'm okay with what this says, except I still am going to keep the goal to just get one audiobook on there next year. Now, the next category is around diversity. Am I reading diverse books from diverse authors? This is really important to me, right? We need to surround ourselves with different perspectives, different stories, ways of thinking, ways of being, ways of living, different locations, things that we could never experience in real life. We need to experience in the pages of a book so that we can develop our empathy. We can develop our worldview and then act accordingly. So my goal is always every year to read at least 50% of my books from diverse authors. And I did not hit the mark. I thought I was much closer than I was here. I read only 25% of my books were written by diverse authors. That is not good enough for me. This is a huge demerit in my opinion. And like I said, I thought I was on the right track when I looked at my reading life from day to day and week to week and month to month, but it wasn't. And so this is going to be a very big goal for me in 2025. Now, next up is, do I abandon books? I am one of those people that for a very long time would not abandon a book under any circumstances. If I started it, I needed to finish it. It's kind of a personality flaw, and I know that a lot of you share that as well. Some of you have rules. I have to read at least half the book. I have to read at least 30 pages. Maybe then you abandon books. But it is my goal to abandon books as I see fit. And so when I look at this statistic on my reading log, do I abandon books? I did not abandon a single book in 2024. And while at first glance you might think, oh, you're just, your perfectionistic tendencies, there they are, you're not going to give on that book. But I realized something. I don't choose to read books that I am not incredibly excited about. I will browse it first. I will read one page. I will read the back. I will go online. And if it's not a big yes in capital letters, I won't even start it. And so I think that's part of why I did not abandon a single book here. But then I really got thinking. And I thought, Stephanie, there isn't a single book that you started and didn't want to put down. And I realized two things happen. If there is a book I think I want to abandon, I tend to read through the rest of it, but not very closely. And I skim it in order to so-called say that I've read it. But when that happens, I don't tend to put it on my reading log because I don't feel like I read it the way I want to. And so for this question, I think the data is skewed. And so I've got to rethink how I'm going to track my book abandoning preferences in 2025. Last up, the final thing I track that is really important to me is how I find books. Do I read books from other book besties, from online, from podcasts, from the librarians? I want to have a nice varied community of who recommends books to me, because if I have varied people recommending them, I'm probably going to hit my mark with my goals for varied genres and varied formats and various diverse books as well. So when I look at this, I don't think I did too bad, right? So I got 43-ish percent of my book recommendations from bookstore or bookshop owners. I got only 3% from friends, 20 friends, meaning physical friends close to me. 25% of the books I read were from friends and other connections online. Only 1% from the librarian, about 20% from the authors themselves, 5% from podcasts, and about 2% from others in terms of an other category. So I do have a wide variety, but I do tend to be more comfortable in one over the other. Almost 70% of the books I read are either from bookstore owners or online. And that's okay. That's not a bad thing, but I do want to see the pie chart that I have in my spreadsheet a little bit more varied and a little bit more spread out. That's the beauty of a bookish spreadsheet. When you want to look at your data, Google just automatically puts that data that you populate in there into these really cool pie charts. And you can instantly see in a very graphic way where you are in relation to your goals. Now, I said at the start of the episode that finding your reading gaps may help you find your life gaps, right? Our reading life is so connected to the actual life that we have. At least that's what I believe. And that was really, really true for me. When I look at all of those statistics overall, there were a couple of things that I could say about my reading life that I want to make happen in 2025. Number one, I want to better balance out the genres that I read. I'm doing really well balancing children's literature reading and adult literature reading, but I want to balance out my genres more. I also want to make sure that I am reading books written by more diverse authors. I want to try that new format. I want at least one audiobook on there. I want to vary how I find my books, and I need to rethink my book abandoning tracking. Now, when I thought about those reading goals, I was just so struck about how my reading gaps and goals matched my life gaps and goals. So I said I wanted to balance out genres. I am in an eternal struggle to balance out my life, right? That work versus family versus personal versus fun balance. I don't ever seem to be getting that right. I know I just need to abandon that word balance perhaps and just say rhythms instead. But it was just so striking to me that I still need to balance out my genres and I'm still trying to balance out my life as well. Now, my goal of reading more diverse authors, that fits in pretty much with my life goal as well. I am a creature of habit. And when I get into a groove, when I get into a schedule, a routine, a work category, I just stay the course, right? If it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of thing. And I tend not to get out of my lane. And that can get boring and that can make your world feel a little small after a while. So I, again, was struck by that. I want to read more diverse authors and I just want some more diverse experiences myself. No, I want to try that new format. I want at least one audiobook on that chart. And I definitely need to try new things in my life. I do. I have a list of things I want to do, from cookie decorating to hand lettering to learning about aromatherapy and finally growing something that actually grows and can be edible in a garden. So many things that I want to do, and I just don't do them all. And so when I realized I had a goal to just step a teeny tiny bit out of my reading comfort zone and listen to an audiobook, I thought, yeah, you also need that kick in your pants to just try one little teeny tiny new thing in your personal life or your hobbies as well. Now, finding books. I want to interact with more people around books, and that is true in my actual life as well. I have the same work friends I talk to. I have the same actual friends I talk to. I work in my basement a lot, talking to people I can't see online. I would like to see more people in real life that maybe could recommend books to me too. So, yet another parallel. And the last one, I don't abandon books. Or we talked about what I found out about when I do, I just don't even track them. That is so me in my actual life as well. When I say I'm going to do something or I have a habit, it is so hard for me to let go of it. I've got to keep doing it even when it isn't good for me anymore, or it isn't right for me anymore, or it doesn't serve me well anymore. I got to keep doing it because that's what I've always done. I got to keep reading that book because I said I was going to. So the book abandoning was definitely evident in my actual life as well. Now, as you're listening to me, maybe you're nodding your head. Maybe you're giggling a little bit. Maybe you're looking around going, oh my gosh, does she know me too? Right? I bet that some of you could think about your own reading life and make connections to your actual lives, right? Finding those reading gaps and minding those reading gaps could be a lot like finding and minding your life gaps too. And we've talked about a couple of ideas, but anything goes here. In your reading life, do you allow yourself to write in your books? No? Why not? Are you a little perfectionistic? Do you need things to be just so? Do they have to be perfect? Does that also apply to your linen closet or your kitchen drawers? What about abandoning a book, right? Do you have trouble abandoning books too? Well, how's that look in your actual life? Do you take on too much even when you don't want to? Do you have a hard time letting things go? It's so interesting to me that the ways we show up in our reading life parallel, in many cases, the ways we show up in our actual life. And I have a worksheet, I have a printable that you might find interesting if this is just kind of blowing your mind today. It's called my Reading Rules Printable. Christy Zimmer, the most wonderful journaler that I connect with, created this for our community, and it helps you just take a look at what your reading life looks like and perhaps the stated or unstated rules that you have for it, and how you can examine them, revise them, leave them alone, leave them completely, and what that means for your actual life. So I will put the link to the Reading Rules Printable in the show notes if you'd like to dive into this a little bit more. But here's your challenge. I would love for you to set aside some time to think about your own reading life in this way. Now, maybe you didn't track your reading life last year. That's okay. Or maybe you did, but you don't have these really cool bookish statistics. That's okay too. You could just sit by yourself for 5 minutes with a piece of paper. Grab a cup of coffee, grab your tea, grab whatever you'd like to drink, and just ask yourself a couple of questions. How varied was my reading life? Only adult literature? Did you read any children's literature in there, or does that not matter to you? How many different genres did you read? And if you can't put a number to it, just think back on the books you've read. Are you stuck in a genre groove? What formats do you read in? Do you vary them? Do you want to? How about diversity? Are you reading books written by diverse authors? How about your book abandoning practices? Do you let yourself abandon books, and why or why not? How do you find the next books that you want to read? And could you broaden that a bit? If you think generally about your reading life, you can still get a lot out of a reflection like this. And then you can have some fun trying to make those parallel connections to your actual life too. Now, if you want to start tracking your life in this way so that you can geek out with me at the end of 2025 and have your own bookish statistics to look at, you can download the exact reading life bookish spreadsheet that I use. Just go to the show notes for this episode, click on the bookish spreadsheet link, and you can actually pick your color if you want pink or blue or tan. I love the pink one because it just looks happy to me. And you can start right away tracking your reading life. It is not too late. You can think back to the books that you've already read in 2025 if you had and plug them in. But if you're listening to this episode at another time of the year, perhaps it's summer, or perhaps it's even the end of 2025, getting started right away is important, because even if you only have 5 books that you're tracking on this chart, by the time you end the year, you have some statistics that you can look at. And what a fun way to choose goals, right? Pay attention to your reading life, find in mind your reading goals, and you just might find in mind your life gaps too. All right, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive I took into my own bookish statistic world, and I hope your curiosity is piqued. How might your reading life give you parallels into your actual life? And then what could you do about it? I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can head to the show notes for this episode and leave your comments on my website there. You can find me at social media at AfinitoLit and go ahead and comment on the notes for this episode. And by the way, I am putting actual screenshots of my bookish spreadsheet for 2024 on my Facebook and Instagram pages and inside my Get Literate Facebook community if you'd like to see them. But as always, you can click that audio button and you can leave me an audio message right now, no matter what you're doing, letting me know about the parallel connections you might be finding in your reading life to your actual one. Thanks for listening, everyone. Here's to tracking a really fun reading habit in 2025. I'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Get Literate podcast. You'll find links to all the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes and at alitlife.com. And if you want more, you might like to join my Patreon community. There, you'll find additional inspiration for your reading and writing life, like bonus podcast episodes, book calendars, monthly book clubs, notebooking inspiration, live events, giveaways, and more. It's only $5 a month, and you get instant access to all of the previous content too. Learn more at getliterate.co. And one more thing, if you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a friend. This helps the podcast grow, and it builds our bookish and notebookish community too. Thanks for listening.